In the small, seemingly unremarkable town of Willow's End, hidden truths and ancient secrets festered beneath the surface, passed down through generations in hushed tones and fearful whispers. At the heart of these tales was the old Whitmore estate, a sprawling mansion that had stood abandoned for decades, its darkened windows and overgrown gardens a constant reminder of its sinister past. The mansion's history was as old as the town itself, tied to the Whitmore family who had once been its illustrious residents. The last of the Whitmores, Eleanor, had disappeared one stormy night in 1947, under circumstances so mysterious and terrifying that even now, the locals avoided speaking her name, fearing it might invoke something best left undisturbed. Jordan Reed, a young and ambitious writer fascinated by the paranormal, arrived in Willow's End with the intent of uncovering the truth behind the Whitmore legends for a new book. He was drawn not only by the stories of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena but by the challenge of staying in the mansion itself, to experience firsthand what so many others had sworn to be true. As Jordan approached the old mansion, the air seemed to thicken, charged with an electric anticipation. He pushed open the heavy front door, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into the grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, and somewhere in the depths of the house, wood creaked ominously. Jordan spent the first few days exploring the mansion, setting up cameras and audio recorders in the most notorious spots, the grand ballroom, where it was said you could still hear the faint strains of music and laughter long past midnight, the library, where books reportedly flew off shelves without any breeze, and, most chillingly, Eleanor's bedroom, where her presence was said to be felt strongest. Each night, as darkness enveloped the mansion, Jordan would sit in the dim glow of his laptop, reviewing the footage, listening for anything out of the ordinary. At first, there was nothing but the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. But on the third night, just as he was about to shut down for the evening, a sudden chill swept through the room, and the air was filled with the faint, unmistakable scent of lilac, Eleanor's favorite perfume. Grabbing his camera, Jordan hurried to the source of the scent, Eleanor's bedroom. The door, which he remembered closing, was now eerily ajar. He pushed it open gently, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was bathed in moonlight, the bed's canopy casting ghostly shadows on the floor. And there, in the corner by the window, stood a figure, a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her back to him. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. He raised his camera, the viewfinder trembling in his hands. The figure slowly turned, and Jordan could see her face, pale and sorrowful, undeniably Eleanor. Her lips moved, as if whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He stepped closer, straining to catch the words, when suddenly the floor beneath him gave way with a thunderous crash, and he fell through into darkness. He awoke sometime later, his head throbbing, in what appeared to be a hidden basement under the mansion. The air was musty, filled with the scent of earth and decay. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized he wasn't alone. Figures moved in the shadows, whispering, their voices a cacophony of sadness and rage. And among them, still in her white gown, stood Eleanor, watching him with those deep, sorrowful eyes. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing in the stagnant air. Jordan tried to respond, to ask who us was, but the figures were closing in, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. Desperation tinged Eleanor's voice as she reached out to him, her hand cold and ethereal. The voices became unbearable, a symphony of despair that threatened to overwhelm him. Jordan scrambled backward, his mind racing for a way out, when he noticed a faint light glowing from behind a crumbling wall. As he moved towards it, the voices surged, as if trying to hold him back. Jordan pressed forward, his body weighed down by a fear that clung to him like the damp, musty air of the basement. The figures' whispers became cries, their forms blurring as they reached towards him, their hands grazing the air just inches from his back. The wall was now just a few desperate strides away, its surface rough and cold under his touch. A small, rectangular outline suggested a hidden door, barely visible beneath the layers of dirt and grime. With trembling hands, Jordan pushed against the outline, and to his relief, the section of wall swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel dimly lit by an inexplicable, flickering light. Without a glance back, he squeezed through the opening, the cries of the figures echoing behind him as the door swung shut, cutting off the clamorous despair that filled the basement. The tunnel was cramped and the walls felt close enough to close in on him. The air was cooler here, and the light, though faint, guided him forward. The ground underfoot was uneven, scattered with debris and old, decaying remnants of what looked like previous explorations, broken pieces of wood, fragments of cloth, and scattered papers that crumbled upon touch. As he moved deeper, the history of the Whitmore estate seemed to seep from the very walls of the tunnel. Faded murals appeared sporadically, depicting scenes of the Whitmores' lives, lavish parties, quiet family moments, and darker images that seemed to grow in intensity the further he went, scenes of rituals and possibly occult practices. Jordan's thoughts raced as he walked. The figures in the basement, were they trapped spirits, victims of the Whitmores' dark dealings? And Eleanor, was she their warden or another victim, bound to the place of her demise? After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, Jordan emerged into a larger underground chamber. This room was different. It was circular, with a domed ceiling that allowed moonlight to filter through a small, barred opening at the top, casting silvery beams onto the center of the floor. In that circle of moonlight stood an altar, and upon it, a book bound in what looked to be leather, but upon closer inspection, seemed uncomfortably akin to human skin. Around the altar, more murals depicted a figure, undoubtedly Eleanor, performing various rituals, her expression solemn and determined. As Jordan approached the altar, drawn by a mix of dread and irresistible curiosity, the air grew thick with the scent of lilacs, strong and suffocating. The book lay open, its pages yellowed with age, filled with writings in a language he couldn't understand, accompanied by strange diagrams and sketches. Suddenly, the ground trembled, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. The murals on the walls appeared to move, the figures animated by the flickering shadows. Jordan spun around, heart pounding, half expecting the spirits from the basement to surge through the walls. Instead, he found himself alone, yet the presence of something unseen was palpable. The air pulsed with energy, and the pages of the book began to turn, stopping on a page that showed a detailed drawing of the Whitmore estate, with a specific spot in the garden marked with an ominous X. Jordan felt a cold breeze brush against his neck, and a voice, soft yet commanding, filled the room. "Find it," whispered the voice, so much like Eleanor's that he spun around again, but there was no one there. Gathering his courage, Jordan took a photo of the page with his phone, the modern device incongruous in this ancient, eerie setting. He knew he needed to explore this clue, to venture back into the light and find what was buried in the Whitmore gardens. But as he turned to leave, the chamber began to shake more violently, dust and small stones falling from the ceiling. The murals seemed to scream in silence, their painted eyes following him as he ran back towards the tunnel, the voice echoing in his mind, a mantra that promised answers and threatened despair: "Find it, find it, find it." As he emerged from the tunnel's darkness, the light of dawn was just beginning to break, casting long shadows across the Whitmore estate. The garden, overgrown and wild, awaited him, hiding its secrets beneath layers of earth and time. Jordan's journey into the heart of the Whitmore mysteries was far from over. As he stood, catching his breath, looking over the sprawling grounds, he knew that whatever was buried there was the key to understanding the terrifying events of the past, and perhaps of stopping them from ever happening again. Jordan approached the overgrown garden with a palpable sense of trepidation. The early morning mist that hung low over the ground seemed to swirl actively around the spot marked on the old map. Armed with a small shovel he had found in the estate's shed, he began to dig at the marked spot, each shovel full of dirt intensifying the eerie feeling that he was about to uncover something best left buried. As the hole deepened, the air around him grew inexplicably colder, and the scent of lilacs became overwhelming. Jordan paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, his breath visible in the cold air. The ground beneath the surface was unnaturally hard, and as he scraped away the last layer of soil, his shovel clinked against something solid. Clearing away the dirt, Jordan uncovered a small, intricately carved box made of dark wood and bound with iron bands. It was surprisingly well preserved despite presumably being buried for decades. Tentatively, Jordan lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked, and it hummed with a strange, vibrating energy that made his hands tingle. He set it down on a flat stone nearby and slowly opened it. Inside, wrapped in a black velvet cloth, was an amulet composed of a dark, opaque stone set in a twisted silver frame. The amulet pulsed with a dark light, as if absorbing the weak morning sun. Jordan felt a deep, instinctual urge to close the box and rebury it, yet he couldn't pull his eyes away from the amulet. It was mesmerizing, horrifying, and beautiful all at once. As he reached out a hesitant hand, the ground shook violently, knocking him off his feet. The box fell to the ground, and the amulet rolled out, its pulsing energy increasing. From the depths of the hole he had dug, a ghastly wail erupted, sending a chill down Jordan's spine. Shadows seemed to coil around the garden, and the air thickened with a sense of impending doom. The wail turned into a cacophony of voices, all crying out in pain and anger, as if the opening of the box had released their pent-up torment. Jordan scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The amulet's glow intensified, casting ghastly shadows that danced around him, whispering secrets in languages long forgotten. The ground continued to tremble, and from the hole, a spectral figure slowly emerged, its form blurry and shifting, a miserable moan escaping its ethereal lips. It was a woman, her features contorted in a permanent scream of agony. Her eyes, hollow and endless, locked onto Jordan, and he felt an unbearable sadness pierce his heart. It was as if her pain, her entire tragic existence, was being transferred to him through her gaze. "Help us," she moaned, her voice echoing around the garden. More figures began to rise from the ground, each as tormented as the last, their hands reaching out to Jordan, begging for release. Jordan knew he had to make a choice. The amulet was the key, he was sure of it. It could either seal these tortured souls back into their eternal prison or free them from their unending nightmare. But which? And how? As he pondered his next move, the spectral figures began to converge on him, their forms becoming more desperate, more aggressive. The garden was turning into a maelstrom of paranormal activity, the air so thick with spiritual energy that it was becoming hard to breathe. With a deep, steadying breath, Jordan reached for the amulet. Its energy surged as he touched it, a shockwave of power rippling through the garden, knocking the spectral figures back into their graves. The ground shook, the air screamed, and the world turned dark. When the chaos subsided, Jordan found himself alone in the garden. The sun had risen fully now, casting warm light over the dew-covered grass. The amulet lay quiet and dark at his feet, its energy spent. The box was nowhere to be seen, presumably swallowed back by the earth. Jordan picked up the amulet, now just a piece of cold, hard stone. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream induced by the eerie setting and his own overactive imagination? Or had he truly witnessed the supernatural, a real encounter with the souls of the past? He looked back at the Whitmore mansion, its dark windows staring back at him like the empty eyes of a skull. Something within those walls was calling to him, pulling him back to uncover more secrets, to delve deeper into the mysteries of the Whitmore family. With the amulet in hand, Jordan headed back toward the mansion, each step weighed down by a sense of foreboding. The mansion, with its looming presence, seemed to watch him approach, as if aware of the amulet's return. He felt a magnetic pull towards the building, an inexplicable urge to explore deeper into its history and uncover the layers of mysteries it held. Upon re-entering the mansion, the air shifted, the atmosphere charged with a silent whisper that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Jordan's footsteps echoed in the grand hallway, the sound bouncing off the walls, creating an eerie symphony of clicks and taps that followed him as he moved. He made his way to the library, a vast room filled with towering shelves of books, their spines covered in layers of dust and decay. The scent of old paper and mildew was overpowering. Jordan set the amulet on a large oak table in the center of the room. As soon as the stone touched the wood, the air around him cooled, and the faint sound of whispering filled the room. The whispers were indecipherable at first, a cacophony of hisses and murmurs, but as he focused, words began to form, tales of the past spoken by those who had once lived and died within these walls. Driven by a newfound determination, Jordan began to pull books from the shelves, searching for any records or diaries that might shed light on the Whitmore family's occult practices and their connection to the amulet. Hours passed as he read through dusty journals and faded letters, piecing together a story of a family deeply involved in the supernatural, their lives intertwined with dark rituals and the summoning of entities from beyond the veil. It became clear that the Whitmores had been not just practitioners but custodians of ancient knowledge, a legacy hinted at in cryptic passages and eerie drawings. One journal, bound in a dark, leather-like material that Jordan dared not identify, contained detailed accounts of the rituals performed, many involving the amulet. It was a tool, it seemed, used to open and close doorways between worlds, a key to realms that mortals were never meant to traverse. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows into the library, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Jordan felt eyes upon him, though he was alone. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, forms half seen from the corner of his eye. The air grew thick, almost palpable, as if resisting his investigations. Ignoring the growing dread, Jordan continued to read, his eyes scanning the ancient texts until they fell upon a map of the estate, marked with specific locations where rituals had been performed. One spot, in particular, caught his attention, an old well in the forest behind the mansion, marked as a site of significant power. The map detailed a ritual involving the amulet, one that purported to cleanse the land of the spirits bound to it. Compelled by a mix of fear and resolve, Jordan decided that he needed to see this well. Perhaps there, he could find a way to end the haunting of the Whitmore estate for good. He gathered the necessary materials described in the journal for the ritual, his every movement shadowed by the watchful presence that filled the mansion. Stepping outside into the chilling night air, Jordan followed the map through the dense forest. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches clawing at the sky, and the path narrowed as he approached the location of the well. The ground was uneven, roots snaking across the path, trying to trip him up. Finally, he arrived at the well. It was older than the mansion, its stones covered in moss and the air around it cold and still. The well's opening was dark, an abyss that seemed to stare back at him as he peered into it. Setting up the ritual materials around the well, Jordan prepared to perform the ritual that he hoped would free the estate and himself from the grip of the Whitmore legacy. As he lit the candles and began to chant the words written in the ancient journal, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a mournful cry. The candles flickered but remained lit, casting eerie shadows that danced around him. Jordan's voice grew stronger, more confident as he recited the incantations, the amulet in the center of the circle glowing with a light that was not of this world. The ground trembled, leaves rustling as if in warning. The air around the well spiraled, a vortex forming as the boundary between realms thinned. Jordan could feel the eyes of countless unseen entities upon him, their attention focused on the ritual unfolding. As the ritual intensified, the swirling air around the well grew colder and denser, drawing the shadows tighter around its stone rim. The whispering voices, once just a vague murmur in the background of Jordan's mind, now crescendoed into clear, desperate pleas and warnings. The words of the ancient language felt heavy on his tongue, each syllable resonating with an unseen force that seemed to pulse from the ground itself. With each passing moment, Jordan felt an increasing connection to the land and its buried histories, the layers of untold stories of those who had once called the Whitmore estate their home. The glow from the amulet intensified, casting a deep, azure light that illuminated the forest in an otherworldly hue. The trees cast long, twisted shadows that writhed on the ground as if in agony, reacting to the ritual's powerful energies. As Jordan reached the climax of the incantation, a sudden silence fell upon the forest. The wind ceased its howling, and even the ambient sounds of nocturnal creatures stilled, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, with a sound like cracking thunder, the air above the well erupted in a vortex of spectral light, revealing glimpses of another realm, ethereal and shimmering, yet filled with an indescribable darkness at its edges. Figures began to materialize around the perimeter of the well, their forms ghostly and translucent. They were the past inhabitants of the Whitmore estate, each bound to the amulet's fate through the dark rituals performed by the Whitmore family. Their faces were sorrowful, filled with a timeless grief that tugged at Jordan's heart. Among them, he recognized Eleanor, her expression the most anguished of all, her eyes meeting his with a silent plea. Jordan, driven by a resolve forged in the depths of the haunted mansion, continued the ritual, his voice now a commanding echo in the night. The figures around the well began to circle, their forms blurring into streaks of light as they moved. The air vibrated with energy, a palpable force that seemed to press against Jordan's chest, making it difficult to breathe. The amulet, now floating above the center of the well, pulsed rapidly, its light beating like a heart. Jordan's hands trembled as he reached the final lines of the incantation, the ancient words shaping the fate of the trapped souls. As he spoke the last syllable, the ground beneath him trembled violently, and a brilliant light burst forth from the amulet, enveloping everything in a blinding glow. When the light dimmed, Jordan found himself alone by the well, the spectral figures gone. The air was clear, the oppressive feeling that had weighed on the land lifted. He felt a profound silence envelop the forest, a peace that seemed to whisper through the trees. Breathing heavily, Jordan stumbled back from the well, the ritual's toll evident in his weary body. He looked around, half expecting the figures to reappear, but the forest remained calm, bathed in the soft light of the moon filtering through the leaves. Exhausted, he made his way back to the mansion, the amulet now a dull stone in his pocket. As he walked, his mind reeled with the implications of what he had done. Had he truly freed the spirits, or had he simply opened another door, one that could bring forth something far darker than the trapped souls of the Whitmore estate? Back in the mansion, Jordan collapsed into an armchair, the weight of exhaustion pulling him into a restless sleep. His dreams were vivid and disturbing, filled with faces and voices, some grateful, others ominous. He awoke with a start, the early morning light casting long shadows across the room. As he sat up, rubbing his eyes, he noticed something strange. The air felt different, heavier, as if charged with a new energy. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more pronounced. A cold breeze swept through the room, and the scent of lilacs filled the air once again, stronger than before. Jordan's heart raced as he realized the ritual was not the end but a beginning. Something had been stirred, something ancient and powerful, a presence that now seemed to permeate the mansion and its grounds. As he stood, determined to uncover the full extent of what he had unleashed, the mansion creaked ominously around him, as if responding to his resolve. The journey into the dark history of the Whitmore estate was far from over. As Jordan moved through the echoing halls of the Whitmore mansion, each step felt heavier than the last. The pervasive scent of lilacs grew stronger, an almost suffocating fragrance that seemed to fill every corner of the sprawling estate. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the mansion felt alive, aware of his every move. He decided to revisit the library, the source of many of his findings. As he entered, the door swung shut behind him with a definitive thud, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the slivers of light that fought their way through the boarded-up windows. The air was thick, laden with a tension that made it hard to breathe. As Jordan's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed that the books and papers he had left scattered about were now neatly arranged, stacks perfectly aligned on the dusty table where he'd worked. But it was the book that lay open in the center of the table that drew his immediate attention. It wasn't one he remembered opening, and it certainly wasn't in any language he recognized. The pages seemed to shimmer with a subtle, otherworldly glow, the strange symbols dancing before his eyes. Compelled by an unknown force, Jordan stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch the ancient text. The moment his skin made contact with the page, the room filled with a low hum, growing louder until it was a cacophony that resonated in his very bones. The symbols began to rise from the pages, swirling around him in a vortex of light and shadow. Jordan tried to step back, but his feet were rooted to the spot as the whispering voices returned, now deafening, filling his mind with their mournful secrets and dark entreaties. The figures he'd seen at the well appeared in the swirling symbols, their faces contorted in expressions of agony and rage. Among them, he saw Eleanor once more, her eyes now filled with a terrifying resolve. "You have unleashed what cannot be contained," her voice echoed in the whirlwind, chilling Jordan to his core. "The balance is broken, the veil torn. You sought knowledge, but knowledge without understanding is a dangerous weapon." The figures closed in, their hands reaching out to him from within the storm of symbols. Jordan felt their touch, cold and insistent, as they pulled at his very soul, seeking to draw him into their endless torment. In desperation, Jordan tore his hand from the book, the connection breaking with a shockwave that sent him sprawling to the floor. The voices ceased abruptly, the symbols falling back into the pages like rain into a pond. Silence enveloped the room once again, a heavy, oppressive silence that weighed on him like a physical force. Jordan lay there, panting, his heart racing. He knew he had to leave, to escape the mansion and its cursed legacy. But as he pushed himself to his feet, a new realization dawned upon him: the mansion wouldn't let him go so easily. The secrets of the Whitmore family were intertwined with his fate now, bound to him by the ritual he had performed and the knowledge he had sought. He staggered to the window, tearing at the boards that blocked the light. As the first rays of sunlight streamed into the library, illuminating the dust motes in the air, Jordan looked out upon the grounds of the Whitmore estate. The garden was tranquil, the well merely a dark spot among the trees, but he knew that beneath the calm surface, dark forces were still at work. As Jordan prepared for what he knew would be his last attempt to escape the mansion's grasp, the air shifted once again, a soft whisper curling around him. "It's not over, Jordan. It will never be over." The words hung in the air, a promise or a threat, as the mansion settled around him, waiting, watching, for his next move. The story of Jordan Reed and the Whitmore estate was far from concluded, a tale of horror that would continue to unfold in the shadows, long after the last echoes of his footsteps had faded away.